Welcome to Serious Insights, our video series. I'm your host, Kristi Campbell, and I have with me today the lovely and talented Angela Mahoney, who is the co-founder, executive director, coach lead for RADWomen and Forcelandia. Represent. And welcome.
Hey, nice to be here.
That's a whole lot of things that you do. We started, you did a great session that I had seen about technical debt. And so I asked you to come and talk to me about it today. Do you want to give me a little background about you and kind of how that became a thing you were interested in to talk about?
Sure. Well, I'll start off as a creator of technical debt. I think we all are, much as we hate to admit it, but I was a platform manager in my youth. It feels like many moons ago. And, sometimes as a project manager, as a platform manager, as an admin, as a developer, as almost anybody working in the system, you're generally squeezed between what your users want and maybe what you have budget for, or what your managers tell you can do, or what the visions of the company are. And you have to make those decisions, right? Of what you can do to meet the deadline. Can you come back and fix it? In many cases, it's not, or it's like, let's just get it into production. We'll take care of it later. Yeah, sure. We all know that, like, is that going to happen? Maybe not, in my experience. So I got passionate about it because I had to talk with my dev team back in the day, or consultants on the projects I was PMing on, or even with the client of here's a best practice. Here's what you should do for long-term success. I'm like, yeah, we don't have the budget for that. Or sure, we'll do it in, the infamous phase 2. But it's out there. And I've been in scenarios where I would ask our developers, just comment this in the code. This is not a best practice. We know this because somebody else will be looking at it someday. I don't want them to know that work was not our choice. We know this. Don't judge us. But it's tricky sometimes to get those. Sometimes I think the technical definition is short-term fixes, things that that are wrong, that you not necessarily cut corners on, but it's the shortest, best, easiest way to get there. Right. And now I think it's morphing into, well, we'll write a workflow right now in our Salesforce world. We know that don't do that. We need to start thinking a little bit along the flow lines, or when you're writing your unit testing, how are you doing your test data, for example? I think for me in our particular ecosystem, it's expanding out into other things. And ultimately, we all want systems that won't break, that will be sustainable. So when you add more business processes in, or you change them, or you take what Salesforce has produced, you want to be in a healthy spot to do that. But it takes everybody to do that. It's not just a single person thing. So,
right. And I think that's what I really liked about your take on it. So, coming in as an accidental admin, I think when I first started hearing about the concept of technical debt, it felt very developer-y, right? Like it's, our code isn't efficient, or our code is whatever it might be. And I think not knowing much about it, it feels like something like, oh, well, you should go fix that right now, but then as you evolve and you kind of learn about the different priorities, like you said, the different projects, the new and shiny things are always going to be the things that people want and that people see. Yes. But in reading more about it, it was really interesting to learn about kind of that. I mean, there's charts all over the place, right? But that exponential, as things get more and more brittle, right? As you build more and more on top of something that's already maybe not as tight as it could be, then you're potentially setting yourself up, like then everything takes longer, right?
Right.
So, I can see that it can be tough to make the time to do it, right? Or the budget, or there's not going to be a technical debt project probably. But
there should be,
right.
But yes, there's most likely not.
Right. But I think conversely, one thing I found interesting, and I don't know if you've seen as well, is the idea isn't necessarily to get to zero, right? Especially with something like Salesforce, where things are changing all the time. Yeah. Maybe it made sense at the time, right? Like have a little grace for 3 years ago, where flows didn't have before save flows, right? And that's just, one current example, but, maybe the fields and the page layouts and all of it made sense at the time. And it's really just making sure that you don't get too far, right? If you have a little bit, and you kind of vacillate in this space, that then once you hit a threshold that you can kind of jump back down and reprioritize and finding that sweet spot. So
yeah, because it's almost like in my this is going to be my very unprofessionally sounding opinion. It's like dust in a corner. I have plenty of experience with that in my house, but if you don't handle it every now and then, it just kind of all keeps collecting there. So, periodically you do need to go vacuum it out, and just, be aware of it, like, know what your limits are, so that when you start reaching those, you can either do a technical debt project, or I prefer in sprints or as part of your larger projects, you know what some of your big key pieces are, so that you can tackle those. We're going to do awesome feature 1, or we're going to do sexy feature 2, and we're going to do this, like, I don't know, purchased feature 3. And then number 4 is, right, we have this, piece of technical debt that we need to tackle, so that you're constantly working on it.
Right. And I think a good example for admins, like you mentioned right now, especially, is we know that process builder and workflow rules are getting sunset. Mm-hmm. So if I'm creating something today, I know that flow should be the way, mm-hmm. right? But it's not my comfort zone yet. So I know there's a part of me that wants to build it in the way I know how. And then that future you, right, mm-hmm. is, I think it's okay for certain scenarios, right? Yeah. But you do have to build in and fight for that time to go back and tighten things up and resolve and look for ways and places you can make things reusable.
Yes. Yeah. Because there's the philosophy, especially the higher you go in management, in many cases, that's somewhat equivalent to the less hands-on you are, the less aware you are, the more, hey, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Or sorry, if it's not broken, you don't have to fix it. I guess that's it. Yeah. Like, don't touch it. Which, sure, that makes sense. However, what you build yourself into, or you back yourself into a corner where suddenly it's going to snap, it's going to break. Your reports might run really slow. You're going to time out on, executing whatever you happen to be doing. And then you're doing a hot fix. You've potentially got users locked out of the system because you didn't make time for it before. And, in the back of your mind, I think most people know it. And in many cases, it's technical debt that needs to be dealt with, instead of like, well, shoot, let's toss out the system and start a new one because clearly the system doesn't work. Well, let's, dive a little deeper into that.
I was reading something that was talking about, like, you're less likely to just set your cup in the sink in a clean kitchen. Like, once things have started to accumulate, right? Once you've kind of started doing things a certain way, it's easier to just add to the top of the pile, right? Even though that creates problems for you in the future. I think it feels like kind of an ingrained habit that we have to make efforts to work against. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, it's a discipline, I think. I'm a big fan of whether you use, Jira or something homegrown or Excel, whatever works for your company, but, make notes of these things, treat them as tickets. So when you recognize, for example, with the big one with Flow coming out, well, we need to go in and identify our workflows. Which ones are we using? Which ones are we not? And then create a ticket, create a placeholder for those pieces so that you can start quantifying it. And that also helps with your arguments if you're trying to get something signed off from, he or she who controls the purse strings or the timeline. So you can say, like, look, we've got all these cool things in our sprint, but we know that we've got these many things waiting and we've got to estimate 30 hours. Who knows what it is, but people like numbers. It helps them make decisions. So being able to quantify what you've got, even though, you might think this will never get done. Maybe it won't. We all know that, but being able to just say, we've got 14 tickets or we've got 186 or whatever it happens to be. It's good to have those numbers there when you're making those arguments to get time dedicated to dealing with technical debt.
That's a really great point. Do you have any recommendations around, like, okay, so if we've bought in this nebulous concept that there's page layouts, there's fields that I don't use anymore, there's too many profiles that are confusing, there's, of course, code, right? There's automations or rules that are referring to things that don't exist anymore, right? We know there's those kind of dead ends. How do you start to tackle that?
I like to write it down first, and sometimes it might make me cry. So I still do work in volunteer orgs because I don't want to lose my technical skills. And when we talk about those things, the wouldn't it be nice ifs, to me, that it's not necessarily technical debt, but it's something you want to put there because they might ask for it someday, so it can influence a decision. But when I know sometimes maybe I haven't done it, but let's say hypothetically, you've done some filters on, a year. This is something that might seem easy. However, it is going to break when the new year starts. So little things like that, like, sure, I'll go back in and fix it. I'm the admin. Why wouldn't I? Well, because I forgot probably. So I'll take, I'll make tickets
until it
like
breaks.
Right. Yes, exactly. Why did it break? Well, we knew that when we did it before. We knew this was going to happen, but you get busy and you forget, which is another reason why I'm a huge proponent of, writing it down when I think about it. It might be low priority. It might be a low level of impact, but it still exists because those little teeny things add up. Probably we've all dealt with that. They add up. Or, making notes, for example, years and years and years ago, we developed a process in our business line that had a relatively small, in the grand scheme of things, quantity of transactions that we were having to deal with, which was fine. Our system worked. When another business line came in and they spun up another team, they were very high volume of transactions, just line of business, energy efficiency. And when they, so we had a process that worked, just low volume transactions. When they spun up the high volume transaction model, it broke everything. We didn't know because they had a different team. And, when you get into DevOps, which has come a long way since then, passing things by so you can take a look at those and, testing that kind of stuff thoroughly is a good thing. Slowing things down at the beginning is a good thing, right, so that you don't have it and take your system down, in the first week when everything's supposed to be great. I mean, hypothetically, of course, we've never done that.
Yeah, that never would have happened, obviously. I think it's an interesting piece too. I think growth is a lot of what causes these things to break. And so, like you said, even when you're not at a large organization, right, or you don't have a large org, thinking about those possibilities, again, can be tough to prioritize in your mind. For me, I think my current struggle, I'm an admin team of me. Obviously, I work at a partner company, right? So I've got Salesforce knowledgeable resources, but I don't have a DevOps formal structure, right? I mean, obviously I would never do anything directly in production, of course, but I don't have a sprint schedule, right? And so could it be helpful, right, for me to put something in place for myself to, what I've been thinking about is object by object, as kind of a way to make it a little more bite-sized, right? And think about the key objects, but also balancing, right, the new shiny things like, actually rolling out lightning pages instead of kind of just turning lightning on. So those new shiny things, even as I'm thinking about it, already start to build up, as opposed to just looking at the rules and the fields and all of those things. But
that's a good point. If you're like me, you get all these paper scraps on your desk. I still do that sometimes. If I'll write it down to deal with later. And I love a good report. I don't know who doesn't. So I like to be able to go in and create my report of all my low priorities or all the smaller ones, or something like that. Whatever filters work for me so that I don't forget, and I can say, let's say we have 30 hours of work allocated to the next sprint. Can I stick in another 6? With a different resource or myself? It just really depends on what your environment is. But then you can also, tick it off and as you hopefully introduce this concept, if it's not introduced, you can also say like, hey, and we rolled out sexy new feature A, but we also cleaned up this that you didn't know. Here's the benefit of it, for example. Right. So when the new thing rolls out, we're already ready for it. We're good. We won't be scrambling at the last minute.
What's in it for you?
Right. Because you have to sell it, right? Sometimes you have to sell it to the decision makers. That's to be expected.
Well, and I think hopefully you kind of get to a cadence of understanding, right? You may be delivering here, and especially in the short term, that may go down a bit with new feature wise, while you're adding in those kind of pieces. But then as there's less and less and you're being more aware of it, right? By the time I cycle through all my objects and come back to opportunities, right? Yeah. Hopefully there's less weight there, right? There's less to have to do. And you've got some monitoring in place. You kind of got a little bit of a guardrail so that you can, get back to a larger trajectory of new features.
Yeah, the fun stuff, right? The cool stuff that people really want to see. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. It's interesting. I mean, we're such nerds, right? But it's interesting because I almost think that looking at your existing workflows and process builders and how you might move them into flow. I think that's interesting to me, right? To think about what made sense at the time, right? If I found like the same things, updating things, and just getting back into best practices and naming conventions and like, I don't know, that seems fun to me.
It is. And how often do we get to do that? How often do I get to stare at that page and like, oh, are we saying, can these be combined? Are they, are they so similar? Because sometimes that happens where a new admin might come in and not really know or be given the time to learn the org. So they just write something new and, either deactivate it or they run concurrently. It just depends. Because I think we all know that it's very rare that you're going to get a totally green org that's, fresh and pristine. That doesn't happen very often. You're going to be taking over somebody else's work. And it's hard sometimes to, quickly, you got to ramp up and learn those, the little one-offs and things like that. So it's also natural that we make mistakes. And I know we want to kick ourselves over it, but we just can't do that. We're going to create our own debt. We're going to inherit somebody else's. We just have to accept it. And like, all right, there it is. We know what our playing field is.
Well, and your business process may be different from when you started there too, right? Like, so what made sense at the time there, may not apply anymore. So I think that can be another way to kind of sell a little bit, right? Some of the seeing what your users are doing, what they're actually doing, right? What's hard for them. And maybe those pieces that could make their lives a little bit easier kind of tie into something that you can optimize or build to pull forward and get rid of some of that.
Yeah. And when you talk about optimizing, I want to spin this over to a people standpoint, because this is, never have I seen this included in technical debt or some of the dangers of technical debt. It's usually tied to downtime, or it's tied to, there's some pretty complex formulas out there of how to quantify it. Don't know if I necessarily subscribe to those. I'm more interested in when your systems get frustrating and you keep saying no to your experts, your developers and admins that are the experts on the systems. At some point, you run the risk of forcing them to leave because they know what's best and you don't listen to them. And I think we all know that it's difficult to hire great people right now. So you also have to think, you have to listen to your experts on your system. And if they are highly recommending something, do that to make them happier at work, which sounds, I think, cheesy and that's hard to quantify, but it's really important that you've got happy software development teams.
Well, and people, that care about the end user experience and that it's not just about your system going down and what financially that could cause you for your customers, for your users, et cetera, but just the general health of your org and the users that use it and having a sense of purpose around that.
Right. Yes. So that they don't have to, configure around or develop around, some of the scenarios that, you have to take care of. Don't force them to do that is my take.
Interesting. Any other experiences with maybe recommendations about kind of helping other people understand the implications or that it's not just a developer problem?
I think a lot of it, in my opinion, is communication. And that's in, I guess, two ways. One is word choices, which leads to the other way of the people in it, because we tend to speak, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, acronyms. We're very good at that in IT. We're very good at that on the developer side as well. So it can make it really hard for people to understand each other. And, we have to be able to do that. In my experience, a lot of people lack confidence, for example, when they're talking with dev teams, because they're, sometimes we tend to put developers on a pedestal. They're solving the same problems we are. They just use a different tool for it, but developers will speak in a different language sometimes than admins. So it can be hard to have the confidence to go say, this is wrong. It's not working. I'm going to make this change. It could be a pickless change. I recently irritated a developer on my team. I didn't think this through by making a field mandatory. In production, because the users asked for it. I'm like, it's just making it mandatory, not thinking down that, the test data that we had in there didn't have that field. So I'm like, blah, 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 let's get this all done. I tossed it over the fence. This is how we work on this team. And it kept failing, when he was running the test, because he's like, there's no data there. And that's something that's so easy, but it just lacked communication because I had assessed it to be like, it's fine. It's just an easy change and it's not going to do anything.
That is a win for the user, right? Maybe that.
I'm just here to please. So because I lacked the communication, that's just a total newbie error, because I incorrectly said, oh no, this is going to be easy. And the way that we had written the testing for that particular scenario is it's, just individual and run it like that way. And it broke. And then there was, some anger, some hurt feelings about a line to fix it, to do that. So, little tiny things like that you don't think are going to cause problems because, because you're not communicating or you're not understanding what the other person is saying and clarifying what's going on. If you don't understand it, it's your job to say, wait, stop, I don't understand it. You don't look stupid. You look like you want to understand what's going on.
Right. Well, and I think, and the key to me in that scenario is also taking those examples that are fresh and translating that into some of potentially the work you want to do, right? Is this the point where we need to make a more flexible test factory? Right. Is this the point where that it's something, for example, that at my past role that the developers built into custom metadata types. So I had a certain amount of power to make changes without needing to recode the things, right? Is there, are there different smaller levers that you can pull to enhance that functionality, which again is going toward just a little bit less brittle, a little bit less involved changes that if you want to make a quote unquote simple change in the future,
that is very true.
Actually help make it a simple change.
Right.
Or is it not the tipping point for that yet? Right. Is this something we're going to do once and we're never going to do again? And that certainly is a tough balance, I think, like you said, of getting to quantify those things, of whether that's a big ask or it's reusable, or it's actually good. The scenario is a one-off.
That's very true. Because I think there's a certain element of, admins do the admin work, devs do dev work, QA does QA work. And, you kind of open the door when you're done, throw it through to the other side, slam the door, move on to the next thing. And then, on the other side of the door, like, pulling their hair out. What is this? What the heck? And, I go back to what Dan Appelman said years and years ago, we all work in the same metadata, regardless of what we're doing. We're all in the same metadata. We're all responsible for the system. We just play different roles, but fundamentally, we are all a team. And that's where I think it's super important that even if it seems dumb, like what I did, I used to, when I managed a team, I would have the lead developer look at all the, you sign off on every single change we're going to make, because there might be something like that where we added a pick list value that code was referencing. So to us, it's like, we're just adding on the admin side, we're just adding a pick list.
Or a validation rule.
Like, we didn't write it to handle, looking at that extra value. So it's going to get caught in the wrong spot probably. So having, being aware that even if it's a small change, we're all responsible for the system. We can't just like pitch it over the fence and hey,
well, that's a really interesting piece too, because thinking about some of the admin tools, right, feel easy, but you have great power there too, right? Like if creating a validation rule can take down your integration, right? Like having an awareness of the things that are going on the object that you're modifying and what those implications might be, and an avenue to ask those questions and potentially track those changes, right? Of, okay, yes, it's hard now, but how can we build for a future where it's not as hard?
Right.
Definitely.
And I think, we all want to future proof, and you do it, to the best of your abilities at that time, but it's on all of our plates, regardless of whether, are we at the PM level? Are we at the B level, BA level? We're all responsible for technical debt, even though it's, traditionally defined as programming. It's all of us.
I like it. We're all in it together.
We are all in it together, because when that system goes down, we're all in it together.
Yeah, we're all going to get in the weeds and get on the calls in the middle of the night. So
sorry, nobody wants to do that. And I'm of the belief that really your project's going to take this long, whether you do, so I can get this right, whether you put the work in at the end or you put the work in at the beginning, it's going to be the same amount. So just build it right the first time, slow down at the beginning so that you have a successful deployment at the end. You have a successful user experience. Don't cut corners at the beginning.
I like it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Angela.
I could talk forever on this.
I know, clearly. Myself included, considering my last episode went into 2 because we talked for so long. Maybe that's why they asked me to host a show. Before I let you go, I do want to ask, when you take an ad minute for yourself and stay aware of what's going on, stay in the mix. Has anything caught your eye recently that you want to share with our listeners, watchers?
Caught my eye. No, I'm going to say what's caught my ear lately. I complain all the time about my husband always having his earpods in and my teenagers always having them. So, if you can't beat them, join them. So I've really been carving out time when I'm doing stuff around the house to catch up. I'm way behind on Josh Burke's developer podcast, but he has such a wide variety of topics and great guests. And then I also got into, I'm going to mispronounce this, the Salesforce way by, I think, Shi Xiao, also has a fascinating topic. So I've been going, back and forth between that. There's plenty of content because I just recently discovered the Salesforce way, but podcasts are what I've been doing. And then when I really want to break, I listen to Smart Lists, which I think is the best use of airtime out there.
Smart Lists?
Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, Will Arnett. If you really just want to learn something that's never going to help you out, not even in Trivial Pursuit, it's an excellent use of time.
Just to learn something. I like it. In a completely unplanned, fortuitous moment, my ad minute this week was also Josh Burke. It's funny because I watched it on YouTube. So they cross-post the podcast. There's no video, but which took me a second to I'm watching, but I'm just hearing. But the Jeffrey, the founder of the Salesforce XD Discord group that I'm a part of, was a guest for Josh on the latest episode from November 8th. And it was great just hearing him talk about architecture and the beginning of a community and kind of how that grew. And so
I saw that out there. And can I give a plug? I want to give a plug for our RADWomen podcast. I think we're getting some out there. We haven't had some fresh content in a little bit, but I really love listening to what our coaches say, for example, or just hearing different takes on learning on the platform. It's all interesting. Everybody has their own career or their own career path and their own journey. And I just love taking little tidbits from different people of, their nonlinear
and finding the things that stick in your head that you then, quote when you're a guest in a video series months or years later.
There we go. There's a post-it on my desk more about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you. Pleasure.